Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hi, I'm Fiona Flintan from ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, and I'm very happy to be here as part of the symposium. And we'll make a short presentation on rangeland fragmentation and pastoral tenure issues. So securing tenure of land and natural resources used and held by pastoralists continues to be a challenge. Though policy and legislation may be facilitating, including in its provisions for collective tenure, it is rarely put into practice effectively. As such, rangelands are increasingly being fragmented, and most important linchpin or key resources are being lost. Following on from a review carried out 10 years ago by the International Land Coalition, the project SPARK, Supporting Pastoralism and Agriculture in Recurrent and Protracted Crises, funded by the Government of the United Kingdom, supported the undertaking of a review on the current status of tenure of land and natural resources in pastoral areas in East and West Africa, trends developing and research gaps. The review was desk-based with input from key stakeholders working in this area with a comprehensive peer review. The study focused on East and West Africa, but it is anticipated that the results and trends are representative of other parts. Theoretical thinking on the topic has developed since Ostrom's work on common property resources in the 1990s, but the central tenets of this work still hold true, that being that particular attention needs to be given to the securing of common property resources through collective tenure and governance, because dividing a rangeland of sparsely and variably distributed resources between individuals for private individual use and management is just not viable or equitable. Rights are first and foremost granted to members of a group, which could be defined by ethnicity, kinship, lineage, clan, geography, or another category. Robinson, 2019, describes the resulting pastoral tenure systems as complex mosaics. Others, such as Flinton, following Nyama-Fuller, refer to them as nested tenure systems, with regulating laws and institutions tending to work first and foremost on the basis of territory or domain, under which a hierarchy of nested, overlapping bundles of rights for different sets of users exist, and often for the same resources, or the same resource. So from a landscape level to a key resource or tenure niche, such as a tree or a water point. A new body of work somewhat challenges Ostrom's theories by suggesting that in some pastoral areas, there is no defined geographical area of use or a group, and rather use can be described as open access. Commonly, this is in the case in large arid regions with low populations of people and livestock and highly variable vegetation and water resources. Rangelands here are generally managed as open access for all herders or those from within a specific group to use and to move their livestock without restrictions and without costly border enforcement. It is said that pastoralists maintain these rangelands with few rules and little resource monitoring. Livestock-driven land degradation is said to be rare because droughts frequently limit livestock numbers, and the lack of controls here enables pastoralists to quickly respond to drought or disease. And it is suggested that a kind of emergent sustainability results as herders dynamically distribute themselves across the landscape, avoiding overuse of the resource. Further, work on women and collective tenure concludes that securing more that securing rights for women in the long term can be more effectively achieved through providing and strengthening group rights rather than the giving of individual rights. If the group tenure and governance system is strong and functioning well, then women can be better protected under these collective systems than under individual rights tenure systems, particularly if they gain those individual rights from outside the group. Of course, gaining secure rights from the group depends on the group itself having secure land and resource tenure, which cannot be assumed. Further, not all custody institutions or governing bodies work to maintain gender or other equities as much as they could. And when tenure security is challenged, women increasingly look to their social networks to access land and resources, including those beyond their immediate household. I'm not going to run through the whole document, and here I would like to highlight one particular trend that we found, being that in the absence of ongoing tenure security, pastoralists themselves are taking action, and quite strategic action, to access land and resources, and in some cases securing tenure. In this study, we identified a number of these strategic actions, some of which are listed here. Firstly, the trends of privatization and individualization of land and resources is nothing new, but as pressures on land increase, this is gathering pace. Often interventions of NGOs or others contribute to this, such as supporting private water access. Further, those organizations concerned with women's rights focus on giving women individual titles, and communities will support this as it helps to secure access, but at the same time, it contributes to the trends of rangeland fragmentation processes. Some pastoralists, such as in Laikipia, Kenya, are purposefully acquiring private property in urban areas as it forms an anchor from which they can then access the wider Laikipia landscape more legitimately. A counter trend to these privatization processes is a recreation of the commons through planning and working across individual or administrative boundaries and reinstating the sharing of resources. This can be seen through land use planning or through landowner association networks. Further, communities are also seeing the benefits of more visibly managing the land, often supported by NGOs or development agencies, through a project or through establishing infrastructure or specific activities such as reseeding the land. Projects and processes such as participatory rangeland management have been supporting this. And though these kind of actions may not increase formal land tenure in itself, it does improve the legitimacy of pastoral land use in the eyes of government. Some communities take this further and work with conservation organizations, putting aside some of their land for conservation purposes. The loss or reduction of use of this land is seen as a worthwhile trade-off when it's balanced by the extra protection that these conservation organizations or systems can provide. Finally, as pastoralists become more aware of the different ways that they can secure and enforce land and which organizations or institutions will protect them, pastoralists are increasingly what we call forum shopping, turning to the system or authority that can best protect their rights at any given time. The result of all of this is the development of new, hybrid, and increasingly complex pastoral tenure systems that sometimes mix both individual and common tenure types. This represents an adaptation of property types rather than an assumed evolution of property in a one-way direction towards privatization. the full implications of these actions and activities really are not fully understood and need further investigation. The pressures on pastoral land and resources have increased significantly over the last 2 decades due to a number of external and internal factors. Pastoralists and their governance and tenure systems continue to struggle to cope with these new or intensified pressures that are resulting in the loss of key pastoral linchpin resources, such as dry season grazing lands, and the fragmentation of rangelands, and an overall weakening of rangeland and pastoral systems, sometimes leading to conflict with other land users. Increasingly, pastoral tenure systems have become more complex, not only because of changes in pastoral resources, but also, as described here, pastoralists have taken up new opportunities and are clearly taking strategic action to access and use land and resources under adapted and/or new management and tenure regimes. There is no one solution, not only for different contexts, but also for the same context, or for the same piece of land or resource, or for the same pastoralist who might want to secure access and use of a piece of land or a resource for different purposes, which is becoming more diversified as livelihoods themselves diversify, for example. All of this is making it increasingly difficult to capture all these complexities in one single land holding certificate. Layers of weaker types of tenure security involving multiple actors, and which can form layers of protection over the same piece of land or resource, may be the way forward. Overall, it appears that this kind of layering of rights, although messy, can be more effective in protecting land than one single tidy landholding certificate. As we've seen, pastoralists' own diverse adaptations and interventions point to the need to look beyond simplistic communal titling. And building the capacity of pastoralists to strategize and innovate in the face of land and resource tenure security is a key intervention priority area, and perhaps more important than trying to secure their rights through an externally supported intervention. Further, increasingly it appears to be most appropriate to focus first and foremost on securing the most important key linchpin resources for pastoralists, such as dry season grazing lands with permanent water access, without which pastoral systems in dry lands cannot survive. This can be done within larger rangeland units, often with loosely defined boundaries and registered for use by different land users. Negotiations will be required by land users to reach agreement over those linchpin resources, but this process in itself can be an empowering and coalition building activity. And it is highly likely that this process is to be less complex and probably more effective than trying to secure the whole pastoral landscape. Moving forward with this approach needs a reconsideration of tenure formalization schemes in pastoral areas and a different way of thinking and doing. This needs to be based on greater understanding of the complexities highlighted in this presentation, and which will require further research. And all actors should be involved in this process, in such a reconsideration and potential reformalization, including both policymakers and pastoralists. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I hope I've given some food for thought in the discussions going forward. Thank you so much.